The Golden Girls was never just a sitcom. It was a soft place to land, a warm Miami kitchen, where four women with hearts bigger than their jokes taught America how to age with grace, humor, and unapologetic honesty. Week after week, they made us laugh until we cried and comforted us, in moments we didn't even realize we needed comforting. For millions, they weren't characters. They were family. But even in a show built on kindness and courage, there exists one moment, one scene that quietly disappeared years after it aired. A scene filmed with innocence, played with love, and delivered with that unmistakable Golden Girls charm, yet later judged through the sharper lens of a changing world. A scene the women themselves would likely be heartbroken to know became controversial. This is the story of that vanished moment, how it happened, why it mattered, and what its removal says about the shifting tides of culture. Because sometimes a single scene can tell us more about society than a whole season ever could. And today we're opening the door back into that living room to remember what was lost. Before anyone ever whispered about a banned scene, the Golden Girls began as something far simpler. Four women, each decades into their careers agreeing to take a chance on a sitcom Hollywood didn't fully believe in. It was 1985, a television landscape ruled by action shows, family comedies, and youth-driven scripts. No executive was asking for a series led by women over 50. No network was dreaming of a cast without a single traditional leading man. And yet, somehow this unlikely idea found its way into America's living rooms and never left. The story starts with the casting. Four actresses whose paths had crossed television history long before they crossed each other. Bea Arthur, sharp-witted and commanding, was already beloved for Maude. Betty White, with her sugar-sweet voice and mischievous spark, was America's comedic sweetheart from The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Rue McClanahan, soft-spoken off-screen but electric on it, had mastered timing like a craft. And Estelle Getty, the least known, brought a theater-trained brilliance that made Sophia Petrillo a character television still hasn't replicated. Together they didn't just form a cast, they formed a chemistry so immediate, so flawless, that even the show's producers admitted they had never seen anything like it. From the moment the cameras rolled, the rhythm among them felt like a song they had been singing long before they met. Their banter was effortless, their pauses were art, their presence was a quiet rebellion, proof that life after 50 was not a fading light, but a different kind of glow. And audiences felt it instantly. Within weeks of the premiere, the Golden Girls became an unshakable force. Families gathered around their televisions each Saturday night, drawn not by spectacle, but by the warmth of four women sharing cheesecake and truth at a small kitchen table. The show won its first Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series in its debut year, a rare accomplishment, and each actress would eventually earn an Emmy of her own. That made the Golden Girls one of the few shows in history where every main cast member won an Emmy for the same series, a factual milestone few sitcoms have ever matched. But beyond the awards, there was something deeper happening. The show was touching subjects sitcoms had long avoided: aging, independence, grief, financial insecurity, friendship, dating after divorce or widowhood, and the everyday realities of growing older in a society obsessed with youth. The scripts didn't tiptoe. They embraced complexity with humor, tenderness, and startling honesty. And because the writing was grounded in authenticity, millions of viewers, especially older women, finally felt seen. Every episode was crafted with intention. Behind the laughter were writers who believed comedy could be compassionate, who believed that a joke could carry truth, and truth could carry healing. And at the center of it all were the four women who delivered each line with a knowing weight, a lived experience, and a fearlessness that allowed the show to go places others simply never dared. But within all that brilliance, there were also moments, rare, brief, and often misunderstood, that would later ignite conversations about what could air on television and what couldn't. As the years passed, as culture shifted, And as old episodes re-entered public view, one particular scene resurfaced into debate, then quietly vanished from broadcasts. No one could have predicted, back in those early days of joy and discovery, that a single moment would someday be labeled too controversial. But that moment did. The Golden Girls never set out to shock anyone. That was never their language. Their humor was clever, warm, and rooted in the resilience of four older women who had lived enough life to laugh at nearly everything, including themselves. But in the winter of 1988, tucked quietly into a script meant for season 4, the writers crafted a moment that reached further than the network was prepared to go. Not because it was outrageous, but because it was true, achingly, uncomfortably true. The scene began innocently, as most Golden Girls scenes did. 4 women in the familiar Miami kitchen, morning sunlight on the pastel tiles, Blanche in silk, Rose with her gentle earnestness, Dorothy already exhausted, and Sophia with that sharp-tongued wisdom that never missed its mark. But this time the tone was different, still funny, still rhythmic, but grounded in something heavier. The writers weren't trying to stir controversy. They were responding to the world outside the studio doors. By the late 1980s, America was wrestling with new conversations, ones about aging, illness, stigma, stereotypes, and the kinds of loneliness that don't make the evening news. The Golden Girls had already broken ground with episodes addressing age discrimination, chronic illness, and grief. These weren't accidents. The show's creators believed older women had lived full emotional lives, love, loss, mistakes, triumphs, and deserved stories that reflected that truth. But this particular script went a step further. It centered on Blanche, played by Rue McClanahan, whose charm and comedic precision had already become a hallmark of the series. Blanche's confidence was legendary, but beneath it was a woman who feared time more than she ever admitted. The scene explored a vulnerability rarely shown on primetime television, the emotional fallout of being dismissed, diminished, or overlooked because of age. This was not played for laughs, it was played for honesty. Dorothy, portrayed by Bea Arthur, delivered the grounding force of the moment, her dry, cutting humor softened by genuine compassion, and Betty White, as Rose, provided that quiet emotional anchor, her innocence not masking ignorance, but expanding empathy. Meanwhile, Estelle Getty, the oldest of the cast, held the scene's final word in her hands, classic Sophia, sharp but deeply human. The scene worked because the actresses had lived enough life to understand exactly what it meant. These were women who had faced the ups and downs of Hollywood long before the Golden Girls. Bea Arthur had built her career on stage and screen before winning an Emmy for Maude. Betty White had been working since the late 1940s, becoming one of the first women to produce a sitcom. Rue McClanahan had moved through New York's theater world for years before finding TV success. Estelle Getty had spent decades auditioning before landing the role that made her an icon. So when they stood around that kitchen table and delivered a moment of pure emotional truth, it wasn't just acting, it was experience. The audience at the initial taping responded with quiet stillness, an unusual break from the usual waves of laughter that filled the set. The actresses felt it too. Some scenes make people laugh, others make people breathe differently. This one did the latter. When NBC reviewed the episode, the network grew uncertain. The emotional honesty wasn't the problem. The topic wasn't the problem. It was the tone, too raw, too direct, too reflective, of conversations America was not yet ready to have in its living rooms at 8 p.m., and so the scene was cut from reruns. Not banned in the legal sense, but quietly tucked away, removed from syndication, and left to memory. What remained years later was the story of 4 actresses who stepped into a moment of truth together, a moment written with courage, a moment performed with grace. A moment that proved the Golden Girls were never just funny, they were fearless. There is a strange kind of silence that surrounds a television moment before the world decides what it will become. And when that moment aired in 1990 on The Golden Girls, it arrived the same way all their comedy did, softly, wrapped in humor, delivered by four women who had built a career on kindness, timing, and honesty. The scene was just another page in a script, a small moment about health, misunderstanding, and fear, but it would become something far heavier in the years that followed. The episode, titled 72 Hours, originally aired on February 17, 1990, and centered around Rose Nylund, anxiously awaiting the results of an HIV test after a past medical procedure put her at risk. It was a story that aimed to educate, to soften stigma, to teach compassion. It was not written for controversy, it was written for humanity. But tucked inside the episode was a single moment that decades later would be judged by a very different world. The scene involved Rose sitting at the kitchen table, scared and frustrated, while Dorothy and Blanche tried to comfort her. In the midst of the tension, the conversation turned toward the nature of HIV transmission, what it was, what it wasn't, and the fear that still existed then. That's when Blanche made a comment that held an uncomfortable truth, that misinformation had shaped people's behavior, and Dorothy, in her deep, steady voice, delivered a line that was meant to challenge ignorance. It earned applause in 1990. Years later, it would earn anger. Because when the episode resurfaced in syndication, decades after the HIV/AIDS crisis had changed, expanded, and been reinterpreted by new generations, audiences began questioning one particular exchange. Some argued that the joke's structure echoed stereotypes that later became harmful. Others said the moment should never have been removed at all, that erasing it erased history itself, and the conversation it tried to spark. What had once been celebrated as a rare, bold attempt to bring scientific clarity to prime time suddenly lived under modern scrutiny. The backlash didn't come until the 2020s, when streaming platforms began combing through older series with new cultural lenses. During this period, several classic shows had episodes temporarily pulled or edited, The Golden Girls among them. And although the show had been praised for its progressive approach to HIV stigma back in 1990, one brief visual gag in the episode suddenly overshadowed the lesson it had tried to teach. For the cast, especially those who were still alive, it was jarring to see a moment born from compassion be reinterpreted through the long shadow of history. Bea Arthur, Betty White, Rue McClanahan, and Estelle Getty had filmed the story during a time when HIV was still deeply misunderstood, deeply feared, and deeply stigmatized. Their intention had always been to humanize, not to hurt, but intention and impact often get separated by time. The truth, delicately held, is that no one involved in the original scene imagined it would one day be labeled controversial. They were actors speaking lines written to help an audience understand something frightening, something new, something that touched families everywhere. They were doing what the Golden Girls always did, using humor to ease pain, using empathy to quiet fear. And so the moment was quietly removed in later years, not with fanfare, but with the soft erasure that happens when history gets rewritten through a modern lens. Some viewers applauded the decision. Others protested that this scene, like the women who performed it, belonged to a time when television was trying desperately to teach compassion. Its absence, in the end, became its own kind of lesson. There are moments in television history that don't truly end when the credits roll. They linger, soft at first, then sharper, as time begins to reinterpret what once felt simple. And for the Golden Girls, a show built on warmth and wit, the controversy surrounding the 72 Hours episode did not ignite until decades after it aired. What began as an educational storyline in 1990 became a cultural flashpoint in the 21st century, a moment the world returned to with new eyes and louder expectations. By the time the episode resurfaced in 2020, the world had changed. Conversations about representation, sensitivity, and historical accountability had grown louder, more urgent, Streaming platforms were re-evaluating older shows, scanning for jokes, storylines, or visuals that no longer aligned with modern standards. It wasn't unique to the Golden Girls series, like 30 Rock, Community, and The Office also saw episodes quietly removed or edited. But for many fans, the idea of altering the legacy of four women who shaped television felt personal. The controversial moment, only a brief visual gag during Rose's health scare, was suddenly the center of debate. The intent had been innocent in 1990, a simple comedic beat, written in a time when public misconceptions about HIV transmission were widespread. But as society evolved, that moment took on new meaning. What once felt like a harmless punchline now touched themes of misunderstanding and insensitivity, especially to younger viewers who did not live through the fear and confusion of the early HIV or AIDS crisis. And so in June 2020, during a wave of cultural reassessment, the scene was temporarily removed from streaming platforms, including Hulu. Not because it mocked illness, every writer involved insisted it didn't, but because its imagery clashed with modern expectations around sensitivity. The choice wasn't loud or heralded, it was quiet, part of a larger pattern of content re-evaluation happening across multiple networks and studios. For longtime fans, the removal sparked its own quiet heartbreak. The Golden Girls had always been seen as one of the few shows unafraid to tackle serious issues with respect: HIV stigma, elder care, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer rights, grief, and aging. Many argued that the episode deserved context, not erasure. They believed the storyline was one of the most compassionate ever aired on network television. After all, in 1990, few shows had dared to humanize the HIV experience, especially through a beloved character like Rose. Others believed the edit reflected progress, an acknowledgement that even stories told with the best intentions can cause unintended harm as decades pass. They saw the decision not as an insult to the women who delivered the lines, but as a recognition that television must evolve alongside its audience. This tension between preservation and progress became the heart of the debate. Some viewers pointed to the facts. The episode had been praised by advocacy groups at the time of its airing. Medical professionals had applauded how directly it addressed myths about HIV transmission, and Rose's storyline was seen as groundbreaking, giving voice to a fear many Americans shared silently. Yet the modern conversation was no longer about 1990. It was about how history is remembered, how humor ages, and whether removing a moment erases the context that shaped it. Through all of this, one truth remained steady. The scene's removal did not diminish the intention behind the episode. It did not undo the compassion B. Arthur delivered in every line, or the courage Betty White brought to portraying Rose's fear with tenderness rather than ridicule. It did not erase the emotional weight of an episode that, for its time, was remarkably progressive. Instead, it reminded viewers that television is living history, revisited, reconsidered, recalibrated as the world around it changes. And sometimes, looking back is not about judgment, it's about understanding how far we've come. Long after the cameras stopped rolling and the Miami sunset faded behind that pastel house, the Golden Girls continued to breathe in living rooms across the world. Decades had passed, actors had aged, and audiences had changed, yet something about the series remained untouched, a warmth that felt like comfort, a humor that felt like home. Even as debates swirled over episodes revisited, removed, or reframed, one truth stood firm. The legacy of the Golden Girls was not defined by a single scene, but by the humanity its four women brought to every moment. By the time the controversial 72 Hours episode was pulled from Hulu in 2020, the show had already solidified its place in television history. It had won multiple Emmy Awards, broken cultural barriers, and carved a permanent space for older women to be seen not as background characters, but as leads with agency, wit, and emotional complexity. And within that larger legacy, the the scene that disappeared became less a symbol of offense and more a symbol of how society evolves and how even beloved stories must be viewed through the lens of time. Yet the heart of the Golden Girls never wavered. Betty White, B. Arthur, Rue McClanahan, and Estelle Getty had crafted something rare, a comedy that made people laugh before it made them think. Their timing was sharp, their chemistry effortless, their affection unmistakable. Even in moments of conflict, their bond felt unbreakable. When Rose worried about her HIV test results, the emotion behind the humor was unmistakable. She wasn't a punchline. She was a reflection of the fear that existed in countless real-world households in 1990. That vulnerability was what made the episode powerful then, and poignant now. As fans revisited the debate years later, many argued that the context mattered, that removing a scene without acknowledging the progress it represented risked forgetting how groundbreaking the show had been. Others saw the decision as a step toward more thoughtful representation, but beneath those differing views was a shared recognition. The Golden Girls had always aimed to educate through compassion, not controversy. And while the scene was reinstated on some platforms later, its temporary absence created a moment of reflection. It reminded audiences that television is not just entertainment. It is a cultural mirror, sometimes cracked, sometimes clear, but always revealing something about the world in which it was created. It reminded them that humor, even when well-intended, can age differently over decades. It reminded them that sensitivity is not static, it grows with us. Still, the most enduring legacy belonged not to the debate, but to the women who made millions feel seen. Betty White's gentle innocence, B. Arthur's deep, anchored strength, Rue McClanahan's radiant confidence, Estelle Getty's brilliant sharpness. Together they crafted a sisterhood that transcended the screen, a reminder that friendship does not erase hardship, but it makes the weight easier to carry. And perhaps that is why the controversy around a single scene never dimmed their magic. The show's heart was never rooted in perfection. It was rooted in honesty. Today, reruns continue to pull in new generations. Their catchphrases echo across social media. Their lessons about love, loss, aging, and acceptance still land with the same soft force. And the episode once removed now stands as part of a larger story. Proof that even when content is questioned, its intention can remain respected. In the end, the scene did not define the Golden Girls. The love did, the humor did, the courage did, and the four women at the center of it all, unforgettable, unfiltered, unmatched, remain the reason the show continues to shine long after their era has passed. The Golden Girls was never just a show. It was a mirror of laughter and loss, of friendship and resilience, of wit carried through decades of change. The scene that was once banned does not diminish the brilliance of what Betty, B, Rue, and Estelle created. It only underscores the weight of their work, how deeply it resonated, and how carefully it reflected a world both imperfect and evolving. These four women offered more than comedy. They offered truth wrapped in warmth, moments of vulnerability hidden in punchlines, and a courage that inspired generations. Even as discussions swirl about content, context, and the limits of humor, their legacy remains untouchable, a reminder that stories can educate, heal, and connect us, even when society is forced to reconsider them. The laughter endures, the lessons persist, and the love behind the characters shines brighter than any controversy. In revisiting the past, we see clearly the gift they left us, a testament to friendship, humanity, and the courage to speak through laughter. For more emotional stories, check out this video.